The pie was hollow, but the motive brimmed with secrets. Welcome to Wolfe Mysteries. I'm your host. It's a thrill to see where you're all tuning in. From drop a comment with your location. Your messages truly light up my day. Let's dive in. I'll confess, when this case started, I didn't catch the scent of murder, just a whiff of cinnamon and a hint of desperation. Nothing screaming foul play. We'd seen worse stumble into the brownstone, some bleeding, some sobbing. This one brought a pie, or so it claimed. It was 11:20 a.m., and I was nursing my second coffee, half listening to Nero Wolfe grumble about Fritz's latest fling with Moroccan preserved lemons, which had turned the kitchen into a citrus-fueled feud. Wolfe, enthroned in his office chair, was buried in Botanica Atlantica, having declared the day a no-visitors fortress, a decree as sacred as his orchids, until it wasn't. The doorbell chimed. I took my time answering. At the door stood a woman, late 30s, red hair pinned up haphazardly, clutching a cardboard pastry box like a lifeline. She looked polished but unraveling blouse ironed, yet one collar snap undone. "I'm sorry to barge in," she said, "but I've read Mr. Wolfe takes unusual cases." The box bore the logo of Lador Confections, a ritzy downtown bakery. If she was angling for Wolfe's attention, she wasn't skimping on ammo. "He does," I said, "but usually after lunch, and never without an appointment. Please, just a minute. Someone's sabotaging my bakery, and I have proof." She hoisted the box like it was courtroom evidence. That raised my eyebrow. Cases rarely start with crust and filling. Wolfe loathes kitchen mysteries, but he hates the unknown more. "Name?" "Genevieve Pike." I swung the door wide. "Follow me, slowly. Don't scuff the runner." She nodded, heels soft on the parquet as I led her to the office. Wolfe didn't look up. "Archie, what did I say about interruptions? You threatened to chuck your drink if I brought another actor with a screenplay. This one's got pie." That cracked his armor. His eyes flicked up, sizing the box like it might hide a grenade. "This is Miss Genevieve Pike," I said. "She thinks someone's sabotaging her bakery and brought a hollowed-out pie as proof." Pike set the box on Wolfe's desk and lifted the lid, revealing the hollow truth within. Inside was a perfectly golden pie crust, edges fluted, lattice braided, but empty, no filling. Just a hollow, buttery shell. Wolfe's brows twitched, not a frown, not surprise, just a faint seismic shift in his expression that meant she had bought herself 60 seconds of his curiosity. "Explain," he said. Genevieve folded her hands together like she was steeling herself. "I co-own Lodar Bakery for the past 3 weeks. Something's been going wrong with our signature pies. Customers complain of missing fillings, underbaked bottoms, or sudden changes in taste, but no one in the kitchen admits to doing anything differently. This morning we delivered a dozen pies for a corporate catering order, only to find 6 of them were like this, just crust, no filling, clerical error." Wolfe muttered, "A mistake." "Remember," she said, and I'll give her credit, her voice didn't waver. "It's not a mistake. It's the 5th time. Something is being tampered with deliberately, from the inside, and I think it's personnel are losing orders. Our reputation is at stake, and worse are. Investors are sniffing around. One of them already wants to pull out." Wolfe exhaled heavily. "Sabotage in a commercial kitchen piece with no filling, Miss Pike. This is not 'I'll pay your full fee,'" she interrupted. "I won't make a public scene. I just need your discretion and your precisione. Think someone is trying to destroy me, not just my business," that hung in the air like burnt caramel. Wolfe's gaze narrowed slightly. He reached for the pie box and examined thickest, not tasted, examined like a rare specimen under glass. "Who has access to your kitchen?" he asked. "Myself, my co-owner Claire Dimming, 2 bakers, 1 junior prep, and an intern." That's it. Wolfe leaned back. And what connection do they have to you aside from the business? Genevieve hesitated. Claire is an old friend from pastry school. The others are staff, except the intern. That's Claire's niece. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Yes, sir. Take Miss Pike's address and business details. Visit the bakery. Speak with the staff. Taste nothing. I will consider whether this merits further engagement. Genevieve stiffened. But that is all, Wolfe said firmly. If you wish to retain me, you will do so on my terms. Genevieve looked at me. I gave her a half shrug and offered to walk her out. As she left, I jotted down the details. Lodar Bakery, Upper West Side, a compact crew and a crusty mystery. I came back into Theophis to find Wolfe with his eyes closed, muttering about crimes against Flower. You buying her story? I asked. No. Wolfe said, but I'm interested in who believes it. Enough to bake sabotage into a dessert, and more importantly, why he reached for the phone and buzzed Fritz. Have we any apple brandy left? I didn't have to ask, the wheels were already turning. And when Wolfe asks for apple brandy before lunch, it means dessert has just become deadly serious. Wolfe didn't say another word about pies or anything else for the next half hour. I left him in the office to his muttering and rumbling, grabbed my notebook and matter for Lodar Bakery with nothing but Miss Pike's address, a mental note to avoid all samples, and the kind of simmering curiosity that usually means trouble is baking on low heat. It was a sleek corner spot on West 87th, the kind of place that smelled like warm vanilla and ambition. A cheerful gold-lettered sign in the window read Lodstar with a stylized pastry star between the O and the D. Inside it was all white tile, exposed beams and glass cases filled with glossy pastries that looked like they were sculpted by tiny French architects. Abel jingled over my head when I pushed open the door. The redhead behind the register wasn't Genevieve Pike. This one was taller, darker, with sharp cheekbones and the kind of makeup that says, I woke up like this, and I dare you to prove otherwise. She glanced up from the screen. Help you? Maybe, I said. I'm her to speak with Miss Pike. She gave me the kind of smile you usually see on menus next to unsweetened espresso. She's in the kitchen. And you are Archie Goodwin. I'm a private investigator working with Mr. Nero Wolfe. The smile vanished like sugar in hot water. She hit a button and spoke into an intercom. John, you've got company. Wolfsman Genevieve appeared through the swinging door in the back, her apron dusted with flour and her hair no-stuffed under a navy bandana. She wiped her hands on a towel and motioned. Amini didn't expect you so soon. Wolfe's interested, I said, which means I'm interested. You said 5 incidents. Start walking me through them. She led me through the prep area, which was as clean and organized as a surgeon's theater. There were 2 ovens humming, a mixer the size of a washing machine, and a cooling rack with a few steaming apple gallettes that I made a note not to touch. Genevieve pointed to a small break room table where we could sit. It started 3 weeks ago. Our lemon meringue pies came out with salt instead of sugar. I thought it was a mix-up. Fritz, our night baker, swore measured correctly. A few days later, a batch of cherry hand pies were baked without cherries, just crust and a few dried stems. Same baker. No, that was Peru morning shift. She said she remembered placing the filling. Swears she saw it on the tray, but when they came out of the oven empty. I jotted that down, and the others. One batch had a strange metallic aftertaste. Turned out someone had swapped out the almond extract for something labeled the same, but it was artificial and rancid. And then there was this morning the 6 hollow pies. She nodded. We always double-check orders before delivery. Claire, my partner, was the one who boxed them up today. Said they looked fine, but when the client opened them, just shell, we lost the order. And Claire is furious. I'm treating it like sabotage instead of incompetence. Where is Claire now? In Hereford, probably. Rewriting our investor pitch, she thinks. I'm overreacting. I asked to see the kitchen layout. She obliged, showing me the ingredient station, the spice rack, the cold storage, the prep surfaces, each clearly labeled and spotless. Either they kept things tight, or they had just cleaned, and a panicked, short, stocky man in his 50s walked past. U.S. with a tray of danishes. He nodded politely, but didn't pause. Fritz? I asked. Genevieve nodded. He's been here the longest, 4 years. German, trained, stubborn as a bread brick, but never had a complaint. Where's Peric? Flew convenient. I muttered. Genevieve bristled. She called at 6 o'clock a.m. sounding like a corpse, believe me. I don't think she's faking it. An author figure emerged from the pantry. A girl no older than 21, with a nose ring and dyed blue streaks in her ponytail. She froze when she saw me. That's Lacey. Genevieve said. Claire's niece. Our intern. Lacey gave a sheepish half wave. I didn't do anything. She raised an eyebrow. That's usually not the first thing innocent people say. She shrugged. You're the detective, right? I just do what they tell me, mostly wash dishes and fill ramesons and filled pies. She snorted. They don't let me touch the important stuff. I asked to help with crusts once, and Claire nearly bit my head off. I filed that away. Protective boss, untrained intern, missing fillings. Find ingredients for a problem. We're starting to rise. Do you have a list of who was on duty each time something went wrong? I asked. Genevieve, I do. In the office. She led me down a narrow hallway to a small back office where a clipboard hung on the wall. I snapped a photo. The schedule's one thing stood out right away. Claire Deming had been present every single time, sometimes on prep, sometimes overseeing packaging, but always there. I was about to point it out when the woman herself appeared in the doorway. If Genevieve was soft-spoken, panicked. Claire was simmering command. Same age, brunette, bob slate, gray eyes like a lawyer's pen tip. She didn't offer a hand. I hear you're investigating dessert trauma, she said coolly. Wolfe's words were slightly more refined. I said, but sure, I don't appreciate my staff being interrogated, and I don't appreciate sabotage, being treated like a misfired timer. I replied, you were in charge of boxing today's order. I was. They looked fine. I didn't cut them open. Why not? Because we don't slice into custom pies before delivering them. It's standard even after for incidents. She hesitated. I didn't think this would keep happening. I leaned against the filing cabinet, but it has kept happening, and always under your watch. Her eyes flared for a second. Are you implying? I'm implying nothing yet. I thanked them both for their time promised. Wolfe would be in touch, and made for the exit. As I passed at the front counter again, I saw Lacey watching me like I was about to declare her guilty. On site, Fritz was kneading dough in rhythmic silence. Genevieve had already retreated to the kitchen. Claire stayed in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me leave. When I stepped outside, I called Wolfe. He demanded. I've got 5 suspects. I said, 1 sick, 1 sullen, 1 too sweet, and 1 who's got motive written all over her business casual blouse. Meaning Claire Deming. She had opportunity each time. She's running point on investor relations, and she doesn't think the sabotage is real. Wolfe muttered. Either it is real and she's guilty, or it is false, and Miss Pike is mad. We shall determine which happens. And Archie, yes sir, bring back one of those empty pies, as I want to examine it further. You planning to fill it with something yourself? I plan, he said coldly, to fill it with truth. He hung up back at the brownstone. I could already feel it, that faint shift in air pressure, the hum of interest. Wolfe's mental wheels grinding beneath his mountainous calm. The pie with no filling had done what few things could. It had disturbed his appetite, and worse, his order, and that meant someone was about to get served a dish they weren't expecting. I walked into the brownstone at just 3 with the appendage boxed neatly in a bakery-branded carrier bag, which made me feel like I was bringing home something that belonged in Fritz's kitchen instead of on Wolfe's desk. Wolfe predictably had not moved a muscle since. I left still rooted in his chair like a permanent botanical fixture. His gaze flicked to the bag in my hand, with a blend of curiosity and disdain. "You brought one," he said. "Excellent, place it here." I set the box down on the edge of his desk, like it might explode before you launch into a monologue about culinary crimes against nature. I said you should know that sabotage isn't just a possibility. It's practically frosted on the windows over there. The staff is twitchy, the co-owner is hostile, and the einen TERN's favorite phrase, "I didn't do anything." Oh, and Claire Deming. She's got motive, opportunity, and a personality that would curdle. Crayon Glaze. Wolfe made a noise that might have passed for interest if you were fluent in Wolfian grunts. He opened the box, slowly peering in like a suspicious coroner. He lifted the lid, stared at the empty crust, and closed the box again with a hideous flick of his fingers. "I want it examined," he said microscopically. Fritz entered on cue, summoned by some silent culinary disturbance in the air. "Yes. Mr. Wolfe, this crust, I want you to analyze it, identify any alterations in fat content, baking temperature, and if any ingredients deviate from standard ratio. Do not taste it, dissect it." Fritz nodded and took the box with something close to reverence. Possibly grief. Wolfe laced his fingers. "No, the staff." I gave him the breakdown, starting with Genevieve, who seemed earnest and genuinely anxious to root out the mole in her flour bin. Then Fritz, the bakery's own, who by all appearances had no energy to spare for sabotage and peeler, out with what Genevieve swore was a legitimate flu. Lacey, the intern, I said, is green, slightly terrified, and smart enough not to touch the filling station. Her aunt is Claire, which makes things interesting. Claire is the only one who had access every single time something went wrong, and she's hostile enough to turn caramel to glass saboteurs. Wolfe murmured, "Do not sabotage for amusement. They sabotage for revenge, prevention, or gain. Which of these applies? That's the thing Claire stands to gain. If the bakery tanks, maybe she wants to exit with her own brand. Maybe she's pushing Genevieve out to take over fully. Or maybe there's an investor angle we haven't spotted yet, and we must determine," Wolfe said, "whether her motive aligns with malice or mere negligence." He leaned back. "You will return, ask more pointed questions, take Saul Panzer with you." I frowned. "Saul. If someone is lying, Saul will know it. I suspect Miss Deming's poison asks far more than misdelivered." "Pies," I nodded. "And what should I be while Saul plays bloodhound to Thorn?" Wolfe said, subtle and persistent. It was after 5 when Saul and me reached Lodar. The shop was closing early. Genevieve's doing, no doubt worried about bad press or more deliveries gone wrong. She met us at the door. "Relieved and a little wired your back," she said. "Did Mr. Wolfe find anything?" "He's dissecting your pie." I get insulted his orchid collection. "Meanwhile, we have a question." Saul gave her a small nod and followed us into the back. Genevieve trotted him quickly and excused herself to fetch Claire, leaving us alone with the prep tables and the faint scent of cooling pastry. So I said, "What's your bet?" Saul tapped the countertop. "If Claire's the one, she's careful, but if she's angry, I'll see it. This kind of sabotage, it's not just business, it's personal. No one replaces sugar with salt unless they want Somiona humiliated." Claire entered 5 minutes later, not thrilled to find 2 detectives instead of one she gave Saul a flat once over, and crossed her arms. "You again?" "Me," I said, "and my associate, Mr. Panza, we're here." For clarity, she snorted. "You think 2 of you will find what one couldn't know?" Saul said mildly, "But we figured it's only fair, 2 bakers, 2 detectives." Claire stiffened. Saul had this way of laying out bait with honey and razor wire. Miss Deming hesitated. "Let me ask you something plain. Do you believe your partner is mentally sound?" Claire blinked. "Excuse me, you said before this wasn't sabotage, that it's probably human error. But 5 incidents, you're still defending coincidence. Which either means you don't trust her judgment, or you're hiding something. Her jaw tensed. I'm not hiding anything. Then who is Saul asked, stepping in a little closer. Not threatening, but undeniable, she glanced over at me, then back to Saul. Look, I don't think Genevieve is unstable, but she's under pressure. She's obsessed with perfecting every detail. I think she's making mistakes and looking for someone to blame. Funny, I said, because she says theism about you. Minus the mistakes. Claire's laugh was short. I helped her start this place. I've put in just as much sweat as she has. But lately, she second-guesses everything. I do won't even let me talk to investors without rehearsing. And the pies, Saul asked, what about the pies? I packed that box myself. I remember seeing the filling. I didn't hallucinate it. If it vanished, someone tampered with it. After it left my hands, who would do that? I asked Genevieve. She said flatly to pin it on me. I leaned back. That's a big accusation. I know what it sounds like, but maybe she wants to force me out, or make it look like she's the victim, so she gets sympathy and leverage. Would she go that far? Solaced. Claire didn't answer. That was enough for me back in the cab. I gave Saul a sideways look. So your take, she's lying. Saul said about what I don't know, but she saw something she's not admitting till we arrived at the brownstone. Just after 7, Wolfe was still at his desk, Fritz standing beside him, a notepad in hand. Well, Wolfe demanded. He gave him the short version, Claire's deflections, Genevieve's concern, and Saul's verdict. Wolfe nodded toward Fritz. The crust, he said, was tampered with post-bake. It was opened and resealed sloppily, as if someone removed the filling. After baking, I frowned. Why wouldn't you know to create the illusion of sabotage? Wolfe said that stopped me cold. So, not sabotage. Oh no. Wolfe said sabotage indeed, but not by a saboteur, by a dramatist, someone creating a trail of destruction, not for gain, but to build a narrative, to frame someone, perhaps Claire, perhaps Genevieve, perhaps another entirely. He stood a rare move and stepped toward the globe. I want everyone here tomorrow, 10 o'clock. I blinked. Everyone. Miss Pike, Miss Deming, Lacey, Fritz, Pellerif. She's not genuinely dying. I want them in this office. We will have our pie, gentlemen, and we will find its missing filling. He turned back and fixed me with a look. Arrange it, Archie, nicely. If possible, forcefully. If not, as I went to the phone, I thought about Claire's eyes, Genevieve's nerves, and a crust so perfectly empty, it had become a message. Wolfe wasn't just chewing on a case, he was savoring it. And when Wolfe savors something, someone ends up being devoured at. Precisely 9:58 the next morning, I stood in the front hall of the brownstone, doing my best impersonation off a matre for a very exclusive brunch party, with the main course would be tension. The buzzer had been working overtime since 9:31. By 1, the guests arrived, like players assembling on a particularly awkward game. Genevieve Pike was the first to show. She wore a navy blazer over a cream blouse kind of outfit that said, I'd like to appear in control, while internally unraveling. I escorted her to the front room, offered her a chair she didn't take, and left her nervously studying Wolfe's bookshelf, as if the solution to her problems were tucked between the gastronomic regrets of Montpellier and rare hybrid Phalaenopsis. Next came Claire Deming, punctual and polished in a pinstriped dress, a portfolio tucked under her arm, like she planned to deliver a closing argument, not answer a summons. She didn't bother masking her annoyance when I told her Wolfe would see everyone at once, not individually. You're hurting us like suspects, she muttered. I grinned. That's because you are. It's part of the charm. By 10:02. We had the full ensemble. Lacey, the intern, looking freshly scrubbed and less defiant than before. Fritz in his bakery, White's face grim, and finally Pa, wrapped in a scarf and coughing like her lungs were auditioning for a tragedy, ushered them all into the office, where Wolfe sat behind his desk, mountainous and motionless, fingertips pressed together as if bracing for impact. So Alphonse stood to the side, silent and when. Sharpied Wolfe waited until the room had settled into a nervous hush. Then he began. "Miss Pike," he said, his voice as smooth and slow as aged port, "has retained me to investigate a series of culinary anomalies which he believes constitutes sabotage. A pie with no filling, a tart with no flavor, a reputation with no future. You are all here because you had excess in motive, whether conscious or not, to disrupt the operation of Lodar Bakery. I intend to determine who is responsible." Claire let out a sharp breath with all due respect. "Mr. Wolfe, this is absurd. You're turning a handful of mistakes into a conspiracy that remains to be seen," Wolfe replied. "But I warn you, deception will only prolong your discomfort." He turned to me. "Archie, begin." I nodded. "Let's talk." A booth-crust Genevieve glanced at me confused. Fritz blinked. Claire frowned. "Thecrest of the pie that was sent to the corporate client," I continued, "the one that was empty. Wolfe had it analyzed. Turns out it had been tampered with. After baking, someone scooped out the filling and patched the crust to make it look undisturbed." Lacey gasped. Parr cowed louder. "That's not possible." Claire said, "You'd see it." "You do." I said, "If you're looking, the edges are too smooth. A spatula was used. It was careful work, but not bakery level perfection." Wolfe adjusted slightly in his chair. That was his version of an exclamation point. "Miss Deming," he said, "you stated that you packed the pies and saw them filetto. You now understand why." Claire hesitated. "Because someone tampered with them afterward." "Correct. Which means either someone did so during transport, which would imply an external actor, a courier or client, or someone within the bakery did it just before they were boxed." "That's ridiculous," Genevieve said, wide-eyed. "Who would permit me?" Wolfe's voice cut through her like a paring knife. "There are three likely motives for this sort of sabotage: to undermine Miss Pike's authority and imply incompetence. 2, to harm the bakery's reputation in order to devalue its worth. Or 3, to create a false narrative of sabotage in order to frame someone else." He let the silence stretch. "Testing it now," he said. "Let us consider who gains from each." Fritz cleared his throat. "I gain nothing from this," he said, his voice low. "I have been loyal to that kitchen." "No one's accusing you, Fritz," Genevieve said. "No," Wolfe said, "but he could be covering for someone, for example, Parr." She started coughing again. "Excuse me, you were absent the day the box was delivered, but you were present during a previous incident. The salted lemon meringue, I measured the sugar. Killer snapped. I swear I didn't know until Genevieve tasted it herself. Did any O'Neills have access to your station that day?" She looked at Claire. "She passed behind me once, that's it. I was retrieving a tray," Claire said coldly, "not seasoning the pies." "Miss Deming," Wolfe said, "you were present during every single incident. That is undisputed. Do you deny it?" "No, I don't deny it. I've been hands-on since day one." Wolfe nodded. "You argued yesterday that Miss Pike maybe created sabotage herself." "I didn't say she was. I said it's possible. And yet," Wolfe said, "you were the one who had the greatest access and the most to gain if the bakery were to struggle." Claire tensed. "That's absurd. On the contrary, you've been in contact with investors. You control delivery procedures, and you were the one who discouraged Miss Pike from pursuing an investigation." Genevieve turned to her. "Is that true? You told me to drop it because it would look paranoid. You said it was just a bad week." Claire's eyes flashed. "At best, dragging in a detective would make us look unstable to our clients enough." Wolfe said, "We are circling the obvious." He turned to Lacey. "Miss Lacey, your access was limited. You are new, and your aunt was your guardian at the bakery. Yet you have a reason to protect her. Have you done so by omitting for altering the truth?" Lacey looked like she wanted to crawl under the couch. "I didn't lie, but I proved it. I saw her." Claire, "feminine of the delivery, She checked one of the pies before it went in the box. She lifted the crust flap. I asked why, and she told me to mind my business. Genevieve stiffened Claire's jaw. Drop it, that's not true. I never missed Deming. Wolfe said you had the opportunity to check the pies and fix the sabotage, but you let them go. I didn't sabotage anything, Claire cried. Why would I destroy my own business? Because Wolfe said you were being forced out. That dropped the room into stunned silence. Genevieve blinked. What are you talking about? She intended to sell her share. Wolfe said, but discovered it wasn't possible without your signature. So she created a crisis, sabotaged your reputation, hoping you'd cave and buy her out or step down. You had refused an offer from one of the investors Claire wanted to work with exclusively. She needed control. Claire looked like she'd been hit with a rolling pin. That's insane, she said. It's elegant, Wolfe said. Except fourth crust, it was crude. Genevieve stood. Is that true, Claire? Claire opened at her mouth, closed it, her shoulders fell. I didn't mean for it to go that far. Just a few incidents, just enough to push you into backing off. You let us take the fall. Fritz said, his voice low. I was trying to protect the business. She said we had a chance at serious expansion. That investor Wolfe interrupted. Will be informed, as will your clients. Genevieve looked shattered. Claire, why didn't you just talk to Mel? Wolfe waved a hand. Because Miss Pike, betrayal speaks in flower and silence far more fluently than honesty. And that, as they say, was the final fold in Thedo. I escorted them all out. Some fuming, some stunned, some just glad it was over. Wolfe remained in his chair, moving his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the walls. You enjoyed that? I said you endured it, he replied. Fritz appeared. We'll have duck tonight with proper pastry, no treachery in the crust. Fritz bowed and left, and Wolfe, eyes closed, whispered as if to himself. There are few things more distasteful than alley in a foreign pie. I grinned. And that, I assume, is your idea of dessert? After the office cleared out and the echo of outrage finally died in the walls, Wolfe did what he always did. After dropping the curtain on a confession, he reclined deeper in his scare breath, through his nose like a man reviewing a fine wine, and withdrew inward, like a snail into its shell, albeit one clad in 320 billion of arrogance and intellect. For my part, I tidied the battlefield, refilled the bourbon decanter, just in case, and sat at my desk, flipping through the shorthand notes I'd made during the interrogation. There were always stray threads, little burrs of doubt that stuck even after Wolfe had made his pronouncement, and the crowd had either gasped or groaned, and this time one such burr itched in the back of my mind like a splinter under the nail. I gave it 5 minutes, then 10 finally. I said that was pretty clean. Wolfe opened one eye. I feel wish to fondue it with less syrup. I'm not fawning. I'm observing. Thien observed silently. I waited 2 beats, but something still off. His eye opened it again. Explain. Claire folds, confesses, and gives a textbook motive. I said, gesturing at my notes. Control of the business, a strategic exit, pressure from an investor. All fits, but if she wanted to tank Genevieve's confidence, why make the sabotage so subtle? The salt in the meringue, the missing cherries, and empty. She was trying to discredit her partner, right? Why not make it obvious? Burnt pies, spoiled cream, real disasters. Wolfe frowned slightly, but it counted a fair point. And the intern, I added, Lacey, she comes off harmless, but she waited until yesterday to mention the crust flap incident. That's not just forgetfulness, that's convenience. Wolfe sighed. You believe Miss Deming confessed to a crime she did not fully commit. I think she was involved, but I think someone helped her, or let her take Theblum, that got him to sit forward an inch. For Wolfe, that's a gesture of alarm. I leaned back and let the name sit in my mouth for a moment before saying it. Genevieve, he blinked. Once you are proposing that the client, our client, engineered her own sabotage, not all of it. Just the last one, the empty pie. Wolfe didn't move, but I could see it happening. The gears, the levers, the frictionless machine of deduction purring to life. I nodded to himself. Once go on. She wanted Claire out. Maybe she couldn't prove. Claire was already sabotaging her. Maybe she suspected her and needed to tip Wolfe's scales toward action, so she faked fellest one hollow pie, called it sabotage, delivered it herself, except she claimed Claire packed it, and Claire did filled and boxed it, but the crust was altered after. Remember, carefully peeled, then patched. Wolfe raised her hand. And how? Would Miss Pike gain access after boxing? I pointed to my notebook, shedded the delivery. He was quiet for a moment, then bring Miss Pike alone. Now I made the call. She was hesitant, of course, but when I added that Wolfe wanted a private clarification before writing his final report, she agreed. Flattery still works, even when the ink's drying on the confession. She arrived in under 40 minutes, wearing the same navy blazer and looking a shade less confident than before. I led her in and watched Wolfe give her the once-over with the indifference of a chess player surveying a pawn that had been hiding its true shape. Miss Pike, he said without preamble, I am revising my conclusion. Her mouth tightened. What do you mean? Miss Deming's confession, Wolfe said, was sincere, but not complete. She orchestrated the first incident. Yes, she intended to destabilize your position. But the final pie, the hollow pie that prompted your contact with me, was not her work. It was yours. She flinched. That's not true. It is. Wolfe said, unfazed. You had motive. You suspected her, but lacked proof. You needed something bold enough to justify hiring me, yet subtle enough to push her to collapse under pressure. You remove it. Filling after boxing, delivered the box yourself, then presented the pie as the final outrage. That's insane, she said, but her voice cracked. No, Wolfe said, it is precise. You did not intend to destroy the business, only to reveal her as alienability. But sabotage, even as bait, is still deception, and deception. Miss Pike always leaves a scent. She stood there, motionless, face pale. I watched her try to marshal a denial, something indignant or clever, but what came out instead was something soft. I didn't think it would go that far. Wolfe inclined his head. Just slightly it did. I thought if I could just get her to slip, admit something, lose control, then I could confront her cleanly. You chose theater, Wolfe said, a pastry drama. You invited me to be the audience, and I do not care for first. She sank into the chair without waiting for permission. I'm not a liar, she said, not looking at either of us. No, Wolfe said, but you are a manipulator. Used me to clean your kitchen. I stepped in. Claire still committed sabotage. She admitted it. It doesn't change, it doesn't. Wolfe agreed, but neither does Miss Pike's performance. Genevieve looked up. What happens now? You're free, Wolfe said. I do not prosecute, I expose. She gave a tiny nod. Will you tell Claire? Wolfe leaned back. That is your decision. But should she ask? I will not lie. I walked her out myself. She didn't say much, just a quiet thank you, which I didn't have the heart to tell her was undeserved. Back in the office, Wolfe was already reaching for the book of orchid, signaling the case had been retired from his mind. So I said, what now? Dinner. He said, duck à l'orange with a proper tart to finish. Nothing flaky, nothing hollow. And that was that. No fanfare, no triumph. Just another case put to bed by the man who solved crimes like he pruned dresses delicately, methodically, and with just enough sting to make the lesson stick. Dinner that evening was duck à l'orange, as promised, with Fritz's delicate hand balancing the citrus just shy of sharpness, and a tart that redeemed every disgrace ever committed in the name of pastry. Wolfe, as always, was silent through the meal, a tradition built on the unshakable belief that nothing ruins a sauce. Reduction, like unnecessary speechy, honored the ritual with a little less reverence, scarfed the tart like I hadn't just spent the day elbows deep and listened. Waited for the inevitable post-meal declaration. It came after he'd returned to his chair, his glass of Armand, held loosely like a priest's censer. He wasqued for a minute, the fire from the grate, brushing gold across the lower half of his face. I detest being used. He said. I gave a low whistle. She did play you, she underestimated me. He said, which is worse, to be fair. You cracked her, and Claire, both 2 confessions. 1p, not a bad yield. He grunted. I prefer a single clean cut. This case, he gestured readily, was layered, crumbling like a mill foe, left too long in the air. You're really not over it, no. I could have left it there, but something still gnawed at Wolfe. Had solved it. 2 perpetrators. 2 motives, 1 crime nested inside another, like a cursed culinary doll, but there was a sense of residue. A lingering bitter sand, not the kind that can be blamed on overcooked zest. You think we're done? I asked. He didn't answer, which told me he wasn't sure. It was late when the call came. I had just changed into pajamas. Yes, I wear pajamas, don't judge, and was contemplating whether I could sneak one of Fritz's tucked away pair galettes from the second fridge. The phone rang twice. I picked it up on instinct. Goodwin. Archie. It's Genevieve. Her voice was taut, like it had been pulled thin by something heavier than guilt. I didn't like it, calling to apologize or to bake us another red herring. I need to talk in person now. I hesitated. It's past 11. Then come fast click. I stared at the receiver. Then I went back into the office where Wolfe, unsurprisingly, had not budged an inch from his chair. He raised a brow when he saw me redressed and putting on my coat. She called Genevieve's a meeting. Urgent sounded shaken. Alone didn't say go. He said call if necessary. If it's another pie, don't bring it back. I grabbed my coat hat and recorder, because if Wolfe had taught me anything, it was that last-minute visits rarely led to bedtime stories with warm milk. They usually involved the metaphorical kind. Spilled secrets gurgled. Motives. Lodar was dark, but a single light burned in the back kitchen. I knocked on the glass pane of the front door until I saw her appear, unlock it, and wave me. Inch looked worse than before. Eyes rimmed red, one of her sleeves stained with something. That could have been fruit or something grimmer. I'm sorry, she said without pleasantries. I didn't come for an apology. What's going on? She walked in through the dark shop to the back. A pot of coffee bubbled on the burner untouched. She didn't offer any, just pointed to a folded slip of paper on the prep counter. It was taped to the fridge when I got here. I picked it up, one sentence written in small, careful letters. Next time the filling will be blood. I exhaled. When did you find it? 10 minutes before I called. I came in early, couldn't sleep. Did you touch anything else? No, just unlocked the front and came straight to the back. The alarm was off, same as always. Anyone else have keys? She nodded. Claire Fitzparmy, that's it. What about Lacey? She never had one, not officially, but I think Claire gave her a copy once when she needed deliveries done early. I folded the note and slipped it into an envelope from the desk drawer. I didn't like the feel in it. The language was too theatrical too. On the nose, it sounded like a threat made by someone trying hard to sound like they meant. Hey, did you call the police? She shook her head. I called you first. I didn't want press sniffing around. Not again. Claire, she's not answering. Did she know you'd be here tonight? No, I told her I was going home. Rest. Something about her posture was beginning to bug me. Not fear exactly. Didn't seem panicked, but more like she was exhausted, and not from lack of sleep, I think. I know who wrote it, she said quietly. It got my attention. Yeah, I think it was Lacey. It blinked. Why, she's being distant, resentful. She asked me last week if I'd ever consider giving her a full-time position. I told her I couldn't, not with the state. The busyness is in. She looked cold, shut down. And now she's threatening you. I don't know, she said, but Claire spoiled her, treated her like she was untouchable, and after everything that happened, Claire's name is Mud. Lacey's internship ends next week. No job, no future. Maybe no loyalty. I didn't say anything I didn't think to the pattern was forming in my head, like a dust print lifting off Asserface sabotage, framing fake sabotage genuine threat. Too many cooks, sure, but someone else had still been in the kitchen all along, I told her. I'd talk Heath note to Wolfe, and that we'd be in touch. She thanked me, but not like she meant it, just like she was grateful to have done something. It didn't ease her shoulders the time. I stepped into Febron Stone again. Dawn was peeking at the horizon. Wolfe was still awake, his light visible through the stained glass of the dining room. He never slept well. When threads were left hanging, I handed him note. Without a word, he read it, frowned, then read it again. This is clumsy, he said. Too clumsy? No, just enough to seem real, which makes it dangerous. I told him about Genevieve Spuspian, about Lacey Wolfe. Shook his head. She is a symptom, not the disease. She may have written it, yes, but the design belongs to someone else. Claire again. No, Claire is exhausted. She has played her part. This is someone new, or rather Samine, who has remained unnoticed. I felt it too, that itch again. Fritz. I asked. Pilot. Wolfe shook his head. Lacey, he said, was the tool. The message is hers meant. Motive, no. He looked up at me. We've missed something. The fire in Thegri had gone out. The case we thought had cooled, but it was still smoldering. It. Someone somewhere was stoking the embers at 7:45 a.m. At with my eyelids barrel-eye recuperating in. My third cup of coffee in hand, I sat across from Wolfe as Hestered at the threat note again. Eyes narrowed like it personally insulted his intelligence. The light outside the office windows was still that early gray, the kind that makes everything look like it's been dusted in chalk. Fritz hadn't yet brought breakfast, which put Wolfe in a perilous mood. But even hunger wasn't outweighing his fixation on the sentences scrawled in tight black ink. Next time the filling will be blood. It's amateur-ish, he said for the third time, which is precisely why it cannot be dismissed. I'm not dismissing it. I say to him, just saying, if someone wanted to scare Genevieve, they could have done more than leave a glorified fortune. Cookie threat taped to a refrigerator, not scare. Wolfe murmured control. That got my step forward. You think it's leverage? I think, he said slowly, that someone is playing a longer game than either Miss Pike or Miss Deming imagined, and they are using the bakery and its instability as the board. I'd heard Wolfe go metaphysical before. Usually meant we're getting close to something, or about to tumble head first into a second twist. You still think it wasn't Lacey? I believe Miss Lacey wrote the note, Wolfe said, but she did not conceive it. It bears none of the linguistic sloppiness I would expect from her previous speech. She's not that theatrical. And more importantly, she lacks the intent. This threat is performative, which means someone gave her the lines. I rubbed my temples. So we've got a ghostwriter with a taste for melodrama and a knack for staying out of the light. Precisely. Any thoughts on who? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the phoneme, jabbed the switch. Fritz, a light breakfast. Please, no citrus. I made a mental note. Wolfe was thinking harder than usual, and orange segments weren't invited. I need you to speak with Pilar, he said, after hanging up. Ask her about her schedule, especially days leading up to the most recent incident. Cross-reference every shift change, every delivery reroute. Anything she was alone for. Pay close attention to what she avoids, not what she says. Y'all think she's behind this? I think she's the only one we haven't truly examined. Benign. I was back at Lodar, this time armed with a fresh notepad and a headache shaped like too many breadcrumbs on too many trails. Pilar was in the kitchen, setting a tray of scone in. Warmer, her scarf tucked up under her chin, like she was still fending off that flu. She looked surprised to see me, tired but not hostile. I told everything I know already, she said, brushing flour from her palms. Yeah, I said, but this time, it's not about what you know. It's about where you were. She frowned. I don't follow your shifts before. The hollow pie before the salt switch before the note. I need to know who you worked with when, and whether you were alone at any point. She hesitated, then led me to the back office, where the shift schedules were pinned up like a butcher's catalog wound over them. Together, me pointing her answering, both of us fending off the sense that something bigger was lurking just off the page. She had, as Wolfe suspected, been present during several of the key incidents, not all but enough to make it curious. You ever work alone? I asked. Sometimes early mornings deliverable. Who had access to ingredients then? Just me, or sometimes Fritz, if he came in early. And what about the key? Did you ever loan yours out? She looked away once, to who she hesitated. Claire. He blinked. Claire. She said she needed to drop something. Off after hours. I didn't ask questions. I thought she was the boss. I stared at her. When was this? 2 weeks ago, the night before the cherry pies came out empty there. It was he made a noter and stepped back into the sunlight, feeling like someone had finally opened a kitchen window and let in some air back at the brownstone. I gave Wolfe the update. He listened in silence, fingers steepled, while Fritz served poached eggs with brioche toast and a side of thinly sliced radishes, which Wolfe ignoredentary. Claire had a key. She didn't disclose. I finished Peril, gave it to her. That puts her alone in the bakery. The night before one of the early incidents, we assumed she only had opportunity. Normal hours. Wolfe nodded, which means she initiated the pattern of sabotage with more cunning than we credited her for. But it doesn't explain the note. No, he agreed that. I believe was someone else's innovation, designed to weaponize the fear already in motion. The handwriting must be compared. He stood a minor earthquake in mahogany and went to the safe. Bring Miss Lacey here, he said as he retrieved a file. Today, and bring the note. We shall have a demonstration. I made the call. Lacey agreed to come, nervous but cooperative, and arrived just afternoon. Eyes red, hands tucked in her sleeves like she was hiding cuts. She sat stiffly on the edge of the red chair, glancing around the room like she expected a trapdoor to open under her. Wolfe didn't speak at first. He just handed her a pad and pen. Miss Lacey, please write exactly this next time. The filling will be blood. She blinked. Why? Because he said I'm determining whether you are a liar or merely a fool. That did it? Her shoulders squared, her chin rose, and she wrote the sentence quickly, then handed it back. I compared it to the original. While Wolfe watched my face. It's not a match. I said, different angle, different spacing. She's not our scribe of course not, Wolfe said. Lacey looked more confused than relieved. Miss Lacey. Wolfe continued, you delivered several orders for the bakery last month. On any of those occasions did Claire or anyone else askew to drop off an envelope or note? She shook her head. No, I just brought food to private homes, sometimes offices, a few apartments. Anyone stand out? She frowned. There was one last week. It wasn't a pie order though, just a brown envelope. Claire said it was a contract for a building on 82nd Street. A man's name was Luring. Wolfe's gaze sharpened a knot. Thomas Luring, I think so. I spoke before Wolfe could, because Thomas Luring is the investor. Claire's been trying to impress the one Genevieve wouldn't sell to. Wolfe's eyes closed. And Thier, he said, is our ghostwriter. He opened them again and looked directly at me. Arrange a meeting with Mr. Luring. I believe he knows far more about pastries than he lets. And I nodded, heading for Thefone. The circle was closing fast now, and Wolfe, now fully alert, fully committed, was about to pinch it shut, because someone had needed this whole thing from the start. And now finally, we were a Boudossy who'd been wearing the apron behind the curtain by the time I got Thomas Luring on the phone. It was clear was not a man who appreciated being surprised. His voice was deep, polished, and lacquered with just enough civility to make the condescension slide off the edges. This is highly irregular. he said after I gave him the briefest outline of Wolfe's request. Sure, I replied. So is threatening a woman with metaphorical pastry blood, but here where? He didn't laugh or deny it, just said he could make time at 4, and only if it didn't take long when I relayed that too. Wolfe, he muttered something about men with too much money and too little imagination, and went back to feeding his orchids, which, judging by the look heg of the note on his desk, were currently ranking higher in his estimation than Mostuman's at 350. Luring arrived, he wore a charcoal suit, cut so sharp it gives the citrus a crimson tie and the expression of a man perpetually annoyed to find himself in the company of people he didn't pay. He was lean, deliberate, and carried himself like every room was already his. He introduced himself with the efficiency of a power handshake and took the chair I offered with the faintest wrinkle of his nose. Like the brownstone was tolerable, but not impressive. Mr. Wolfe, he said, glancing over. I understand you wanted to speak with me about a matter concerning Lodar Bakery. I'd appreciate it if we could be efficient. My time is limited. Wolfe looked at him as if luring were a recipe submitted to gourmet by a 9-year-old Mr. Loring. Wolfe said you have invested directly or through intermediaries in at least 3 boutique food businesses in the last 2 years. Lodar was to be your 4th. I was considering it. Loring replied, carefully neutral. Miss Pike declined, Wolfe said. And Missy Deming Wassiger, a conflict you chose to influence at Loring. Didn't blink. I made no such move. No, then, allow me to elaborate your conduct for you. You advised Claire de Mind privately encouraged her to steer the business into instability to force Genevieve's hand. You fed her doubts, perhaps, even planted suggestions sabotage as persuasion, not destruction. You saw Claire's anxiety and banked on it. That's conjecture. Loring said, ice beginning to form behind his voice. It's deduction, Wolfe said coldly. But we'll move to something more tangible. You had a note delivered by Miss Deming or someone she manipulated to Miss Pike, a theatrical threat, sloppy in tone, transparent in intent, meant to push her no further, unravel. You overplayed. I did nothing of the kin. Wolfe leaned forward a 4, in more movement than he'd made in 2 hours. Had the note synchronized commercial ballpoint, fine tips sold in bulk to 4 vendors. In Manhattan, one of them supplies executive ifs for your real estate firm. Loring's jaw clenched. Not much, but enough any uncle to have bought that pen, yes? Wolfe said, but only one of them used it to write a message that matched in phrase and posture. An email you sent 6 months ago to a previous business partner theft raising is identical. You've left me no choice next time. The gloves come off, and in this case, the metaphor mutated into filling. Instead of gloves, I saw Loring's eyes flicker a flash of fury, then calculation. He leaned back and crossed his legs. You have no proof. I wrote that note. I don't require proof. Wolfe said, I require knowledge, and I now know that your influence over Claire Deming extended well beyond advice. You manipulated her, and then you manipulated the narrative. You orchestrated the notetto provoke Genevieve into further erratic action, likely hoping she'd withdraw or implode. Loring smiled thinly. That's a story, but it isn't actionable. Number Wolfe said, it's not you've committed no legal offense, but you have revealed yourself. Miss Pike will no longer tolerate your interest, and I will ensure that any future venture you pursue will preceded by the record of this encounter quietly. Efficiently, Loring stood. His smile didn't reach his eyes. You're very good at this, he said. I am Wolfe, replied. I'll keep that in mind. And just like that, he left. I followed him to the door and watched him disappear into the late afternoon light. His shoulders rigid, his stride clipped, the kind of man who hated losing more than most people hate bleeding. When I returned to the office, Wolfe was already reclining again, eyes closed, hands resting like settled dust. Well, I said, that was polite. He's a virus. Wolfe murmured, he mutates to survive. But he won't infect Lodar again, do we tell Genevieve? She must be told, but not today. I nodded. And Claire, she's already paid her price. She was used, then discarded a fitting. Irony that might have been it. Case wrapped evil, dodged sanity, restored except for one. Final footnote, that arrived by way of a hesitant knock at the front door that evening. It was. Lassiche stood there in jeans and a faded hoodie, hands shoved in her pockets, face pale but determined. I let her in without asking. I know who wrote the note, she said. I didn't interrupt. It wasn't me, it wasn't Claire, it was Parr. It caught me. She asked me to copy it. Lacey said it was a joke. Said Genevieve was being dramatic, and she wanted to shake her. I didn't think it was real, but when you started asking about handwriting, I panicked. I thought I'd be blamed. I guided her into Theophis and let Wolfe absorb her words without a single movement. Then slowly, he opened his eyes. Miss Peel, he said, had access, motive, and immunity. She was overlooked as so many are. Lacey nodded. She didn't like. Genevieve thought she was soft, said she wouldn't last, said she was ruining the bakery, and Miss Deminch didn't know. Wolfe closed his eyes again. She was another porn. Pilar had vision. Claire had anxiety. What do we do? I asked. Nothing. Wolfe said the truth is known, miss. Pilar will be removed, but not punished, not for malice. Threatened someone. She bluffed. Wolfe said she wrote a line. She never intended to act on, and she failed. I showed Lacey out, gave her a word or two of thanks, and came back to the quiet. Wolfe reached for his Armagnac. So I said, what's the morale this time? He took a sip, then set the glass down. Fear. He said, makes excellent pastry, layers upon layers. But truth is the filling, and if there's none inside, no matter how beautiful the crusted, is still hollow. I looked at the clock. Dinner. He nodded. Odds. Tell Fritz no pies tonight. Then I paused at the doorway. But tomorrow hallowed a rare smile, something sweet with substance. The following morning Kami with a drizzle that tapped the windows like an impatient creditor. The brownstone, usually a fortress, against chaos of Manhattan, felt quieter than usual, as though it too was pausing. Cottages, the last course of truth. Wolfe stayed in his chair long, past the breakfast hour, saying little. I flitted as he stared at nothing. You'd think he was meditating on orchids, not human deceit. I, on the other hand, had the cleanup shift by 10 o'clock. I'd already called Genevieve Pike to deliver the full account. I kept it clean. Claire had been manipulated. The note had been written under false pretenses. The real instigator of that final dramatic twist had been Parr, and the puppet master behind much of the storm was none other than Thomas. Luring, she'd taken it with a kind of numb relief, like someone who hadn't realized how close they were to being swept out to sea until the lifeboat arrived. I suppose I should fire Pilar, she said quietly. That would be the responsible thing. I replied, but not the easy one. No, I admitted. Firing someone always burns even if they've been dousing the walls in gasoline. She didn't ask if she could come thank Wolfe in person. That I respected. She understood finally what most clients take weeks to learn. Gratitude was something Wolfe accepted in the form of checked silence and never darkening his doorway again. Claire sent a message later that day, a clipped email from a borrowed address. Her own had likely been retired in disgrace. It read, I don't know if I should thank you or curse you, but at least now I can start over with both eyes open. CD. Wolfe didn't even glance at it. Good. He said, may she build something eatable next time. As for Lacey, she left the city 2 days later, back to Vermont, presumably to lick her wounds and bury the memory of being caught between her aunt's ambitions and a sabotage plot disguised as mentorship. I didn't press her on what else Pilar might have said, or promise it some things are better left with only the corner folded down. It was Parr herself who surprised me next. She showed up unannounced on the fourth morning after the storm had passed, wearing her chest jacket like armor, and her expression. Like she'd finally made peace with what was coming, I was alone in Pfeffert Hall, sorting through a stack of Wolfe's mail, when the buzzer rattled me out of my rhythm. I opened the door expecting a delivery. Maybe a new shipment of the rare Ugandan vanilla pods. Wolfe had been fawning over instead there. She stood umbrella dripping and eyes steady. "I'm here to speak to Nero Wolfe," she said. "You're lucky. I haven't invented an automatic rejection button." I muttered, but stepped aside. She didn't flinch. As I led her to the office, Wolfe looked up as I announced her, his expression unreadable, but not hostile. He gestured her in. Like she was a dish he didn't remember ordering. "I won't waste your time," Parr said as she sat. "I wanted you to hear it from me." I wrote the note, I know. Wolfe said I gave it to Lacey. Told her. It was a joke that was a lie. I knew Genevieve would find it. Wolfe said nothing. I did it because I thought the business deserved better. I thought she was weak. I was wrong. "You are arrogant," Wolfe said, his tone even and petty, but not wrong. That stopped her. She was unprepared. Wolfe continued. She led with sentiment and delayed with doubt. "Your frustration was understandable. Your method was not." "I see that now." "Do you?" He stood leaning forward slightly. "Sabotage is not just unprofessional. It's a symptom of cowardice. You made yourself the judge of another's worth and delivered sentence behind their back that is contemptible." Parallel swallowed. "And you'll be glad to know it resigned." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "I left my key on the counter," she said. And he told Genevieve what I did, the full story, no edits. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "That is better than I expected." She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't wait for approval, just stood, nodded to me, and left. Wolfe sat for a while, afterward gazing at the empty space she'd left behind, as if watching a soul collapse. "She'll land somewhere," he said eventually. "She's good." I said. "She's dangerous." Wolfe replied, "And dangerous people are always useful to someone." 2 hours later, Fritz delivered a custard tart with a brown meringue swirl on top. He raised an eyebrow. "From Genevieve," he said. "No note." Wolfe gave it a single glance before shaking his head. "Take it to the kitchen. We'll serve it to Saul tomorrow. If it's poisoned, he'll notice before he swallows." Very generous of you. In a forgiving mood that I had to write down. The next few days were quiet. Wolfe retreated back into his books and broth. I handled the light casework, mostly background checks for clients Turek and paranoid to use. Google and Fritz polished the glass in the dining room until it gleamed like it remembered buying fire. One evening, Wolfe called me into the office just after dinner. He had a brandy in hand, one finger pressed to the rim like a punctuation mark. "Archie," he said. "Why did she send the tart?" "Genevieve." "Yes, she was grateful." "No," Wolfe said. "She was closing the loop, ending the story, and it was a poor gesture, too symbolic, too final." I leaned back. "You think she'd be back?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that she may one day remember what it felt like to deceive even for justice, and realize how close she came to becoming the villain, and when she does, she will understand what I truly did for her." He took a sip of brandy. "And Finch may send something worth eating." I chuckled. "That your idea of closure?" "No," Wolfe said. "It's my idea of progress." I sat there for a moment, watching the fire flicker low behind him outside. The rain had returned gentler now, like the sky was wiping its face clean. The pie with no filling had been solved, but the people involved, they were still finding their centers. Wolfe reached for his book. I reached for my coat, and for the first time in days, the brownstone felt settled again. Still Wolfe. 3 days after Wolfe declared the case settled, just as I'd begun to relax into delusion that the only mystery we'd faced that week would involve a misfiled orchid ledger, the doorbell rang. Not Thepolite clicked buzz of a client by appointment. This was the long-pressed second of ring that thinks it's more important than it is. I opened the door expecting a courier, or maybe saw Panzer adjourning the tart dish. instead standing there in a damp trench coat, with a beige file folder clutched in both hands, was a man in his late 30s with thinning black hair, an anxious brow, and the look of someone who had just realized he'd been walking through his life with his shoes on the wrong feet. He held up the folder like a peace offering. "My name is Dennis Kent. I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe." "No one needs to speak with Mr. Wolfe," I said. Most people merely serve it. That didn't seem to dissuade him. I could see it in his eyes. Whatever was carrying in that folder had weight, and he decided, probably in a fit of panic, that we were the only place left to drop it. I showed him into the front room and buzzed Wolfe, who responded with his usual enthusiasm for surprise visits, a grunt. "Mr. Wolfe," I said when it coaxed Kent into a chair and retrieved him a glass of water, "we have a visitor. He claims he's not here about Appy." "But I wouldn't bet the rent I am not," Kent said quickly. "It's about Lodar Bakery that got Wolfe's attention." I saw it in the pause before his voice returned over the intercom. "Bring him." Kent sat across from Wolfe with the folder on his knees. A man trying to will himself into composure. Wolfe glanced at him with the vague curiosity he reserved from new ingredients he didn't yet trust. "Explain," he said. Kent opened the folder and laid out half a dozen documents, typed contracts, annotated ledgers, and one rather battered envelopedrist to Claire Deming. "I work for Halbert Capital," he said. "One of our investment arms was quietly evaluating Lodar before your investigation. I was handling the due diligence. I knew something was wrong. The numbers didn't line up, but Claire and Genevieve both insisted it was just growing pains. Growing pains that included fraudulent figures." I asked, eyeing the documents. Kent gave a twitch of a nod. "Claire was moving funds, small amounts but steadily, into a separate account. Not stolen, just mere reported. I confronted her about it. She said she needed the liquidity to convince an external partner, Thomas Luring, to bridge a short-term equipment deal." Said Genevieve didn't know. "Shouldn't," Wolfe said flatly. "No," Kent agreed. "I didn't think so either. I was waiting to take it to my director. When your name showed up, word spread fast. So I waited." "Why come now?" Wolfe asked. "Because something's wrong, I think." "Luring isn't in." Wolfe leaned forward slightly. "Go on." "Last night," Ken said, "Claire called me. She sounded hollow. She said she'd been approached by a third-party animus, she said, who claimed to have documentation that would implicate Genevieve in the accountant discrepancy." I narrowed my eyes. Blackmail, not in the classic sense, more like coercion. The suggestion was that if Claire didn't stay quiet about her own part in the mess, someone would make it look like Genevieve was the one who initiated it. Wolfe frowned. "Simeon is constructing a new narrative." "Yes," Kent said, "and I think Luring's bent it. I think he wants the business to collapse under Genevieve's name, now not Claire's. With her gone, the bakery loses its identity. It's easier to buy at a discount, ruin an acquisition." Wolfe murmured, "Efficient, brutal, but he's buying subtle." Kent added, "He's using intermediaries. And Claire, I think she's scared." I looked at Wolfe, who was already forming the strategy behind his eyes. "He's pivoted," I said, "after being expositas, shifting the blame, creating a new villain to bring down Lodar from within. Miss Pike will not fall for it." Wolfe said she might. I countered, "If the documents are convincing enough, if Claire panics and corroborates just enough to lend them credibility, then we must see the documents." Wolfe said. Kent nodded. "I don't have them, but Claire said she was meeting the courier this evening. A drop, not a conversation. 700p. And Bryant Park." Archie Wolfe said, "Go observe, if possible intercept, and if Luring has stooped to theatrical drops. I want to know how far the rot has spread." I left with Kent, who gave me the meat details and promised to keep quiet until Wolfe gave the out. Word Bryant Park was busy enough in the evening to cover a discreet handoff, but quiet enough in pockets to make a man nervous. At 6:45, I stationed myself near the fountain coat collar turned up watching Claire arrive 5 minutes later, wearing dark glasses and a nervous tick that kept her glancing over her shoulder. She sat on the edge of a bench with a folded newspaper in her lap, like we were auditioning for a Cold War spy movie. At precisely Siren, a man in a tweed cap and gray overcoat passed and dropped an envelope on the bench beside her, murmuring something. I couldn't catch Claire, didn't speak, just waited a beat, and picked it up and left. I followeth. Delivery guy 4 blocks before he ducked into a deli and vanished out. The back professional, not a random messenger simmy, used to avoiding tailies. I went back to the brownstone and gave Wolfe their port. He nodded once, and we waited. Claire called at 8:40. Wolfe took it in Theophis. I sat outside the door. After 10 minutes, he called me in. She received fabricated ledgers. He said altered payroll, fictitious transfers, fake invoices, all dated, printed on bakery letterhead. She believe it. She doesn't want to, but fear has a strong flavor. You think luring made them without doubt. Then what's the plan? Wolfe lifted a brow. We let him believe he succeedeth. Next morning, Wolfe called Genevieve. He told her with remarkable delicacy that someone was attempting to forge a financial trail in her name. He told her to act shocked, but not too shocked to tolerate it, reach Luring's ears through. Claire to pretend the business was reeling, leadership divided, and then once he took bait, Wolfe would spring his real trap. You're enjoying this, I said when he hung up. I am restoring balance, he replied. But you hate theater. No, Wolfe said, I hate bad theater. This Mr. Goodwin will be a command performance. And judging by the way he leaned back, steepled his fingers, and finally allowed himself a small, rare smile, I knew something. Wolfe rarely admitted he wasn't just planning to stop luring, he was planning to humiliate him. And I, for answer, couldn't wait for the final act. It happened the following evening, just as Wolfe intended, with every piece of the game arranged on the board sonately. You could have laid out Hordias between them. Claire arrived at Thebron Stone at 6 sharp. Eyes still shadowed, nerves still on edge. She didn't ask questions. When I took her coat and led her into the office, Luring followed. 20 minutes later, self-invited, confident as a buzzard on a power line. His coat was sharp, his eyes sharper, when Hess stepped into the room and saw Claire already seated across from Wolfe. Something in his expression flickered, but he didn't back down. Not Thomas. Luring. Genevieve arrived last, with her hair pulled back and her jaw set like she'd finally decided she was done letting anyone else shape the narrative of her business. She didn't speak to Claire. Claire didn't look at her. The airhead weight Salt Panza stood at the back wall like wallpaper, which meant he waist-wise as dangerous and 3 times as observant. Wolfe remained seated, of course, behind his desk with his fingers steepled and his eyes half-lidded, like he was letting the silence rise before slicing into it. Then he spoke. Miss Pike, Miss Deming, Mr. Luring, thank you for indulging my eccentricity. I dislike unresolved matters, particularly when they offend principles of order and justice, to which I grudgingly subscribe. Luring made a sound halfway between a laugh and a cough. If this is about Claire's mistake, I think we've addressed that silence. Wolfe said flatly. It wasn't loud. It didn't eat. To be you will have ample time to lie, Mr. Luring. Let me first lay out what I know. He turned his gaze on Claire. You were misled. You were told that short-term manipulation of funds, framed as a liquidity bridge, would help secure a deal. You were persuaded by a man who promised you control, independence, and a lucrative future. In your desperation, you committed acts that were foolish but not criminal. Claire swallowed but said nothing. Then Wolfe went on. When your efforts failed, Mr. Luring attempted to write the story. Fabricated ledgers, forged signatures, a planted narrative with Mrs. Pike as the architect of deception, and you, Miss Deming, as the frightened accomplice. A new scandal in which he could swoop in, acquire the remains of the bakery, and position himself as the savior. He turned to Genevieve. he counted on your pride on. Your silence, he miscalculated during, sat back smiling just slightly. That's a lot of drama for a bakery, Wolfe sighed. It is always drama for the Thingman. Desire, control, reputation, revenge, they rise in the flower. He tapped Fiendel on his desk. We obtained the courier's records, the man you used fourth drop. Mr. Luring is a professional intermediary hired through a shell logistics firm your company once used in a proxy acquisition. On West 58th, it took Mr. Panzer an afternoon to connect feuds. And the financial forgeries sloppy. They include payroll discrepancies refancies. A staff member who had resigned 3 months prior. Luring opened at his mouth, but Wolfe continued furthermore. The original source of the sabotage, the salted pies, the empty TARTS, can now be firmly placed within a linear Chester, not by misdeeming alone, but by pressure. Applied through your instructions and promises, the trail is less provable, but no less visible to the trained. Luring's smirk was gone, now he looked at Claire, then at Genevieve, and saw finally that neither one was playing deaths anymore. So what? He said softly. Do you want public humiliation? No. Wolfe said merely your exit. Genevieve spoke for the first time. You'll surrender all interest. In Lodar publicly, you'll sign the release, Saul brought, and you'll remove your name, or any proxy's name, from our investor. Roles no lawsuits, no offers, you vanish, Claire added. And if you don't, we leak thefforgeries. I'll testify, Genevieve will. Wolfe. Will we bury you? Floring looked at them, then at Wolfe, whose gaze hadn't moved a millimeter. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Then he reached into his coat, pulled out a fountain pen, and signed the release. Good luck. He said the city eats eye dreams. For breakfast, then it will find us undercooked. Genevieve replied. He left without another word when the door clicked shut. Wolfe finally leaned back in his chair and exhaled deeply, slowly, like a balloon letting out the last of its arrogance. Claire stood. I don't expect forgiveness. No, Wolfe said. You shouldn't, but I do expect improvement. Genevieve nodded at Wolfe. Thank you for clearing the air. I did not do it for gratitude, Wolfe said. I know, she said, but thank you anyway. They left together, Claire just a half step behind. Genevieve, like maybe something between them hadn't shattered completely, just cracked and warped, waiting for time and humility to do the rest. I shut the door behind them and turned back to Wolfe. That was satisfying, I said. He reached for his beer, took a sip, and stared at the ceiling like it told him something. I doubt Mr. Luring will trouble them again, he said, but there are always others. The world is full of men who see women's work as opportunity. You think Genevieve will hold her own? I think she knows now what ambition looks like in the dark. Fritz arrived with dinner, roasted garlic, braised leeks, and the scent brought Wolfe fully back to earth. Dessert? I asked as I took my seat across from him. Wolfe glanced up. Applet tart, simple, honest, with proper filling. I grinned. The kind you can trust. He didn't smile, but his eyes flicked toward the kitchen, as if he were already tasting it. No deceit, he said. No flourishes, just truth in crust. And with that, the case of the pie with no filling was finally fully done, finished with clarity, seasoned with justice, served at the precise temperature Wolfe required. And I'll admit it, the tart that night was perfect.